The fear response theory. The observation deck of Station Nexus Prime offered a breathtaking view of the Andromeda Spiral, but Dr. Marcus Kane barely noticed the cosmic display as he hurried through the corridors toward Lecture Hall Gamma 7. The soft hum of the station's artificial gravity generators provided a constant backdrop to the sounds of hundreds of different species going about their daily routines. As one of only 12 humans enrolled in the Intergalactic University of Behavioral Sciences, Marcus had grown accustomed to being the subject of curious stares and whispered conversations in languages his universal translator couldn't quite parse. The lecture hall buzzed with the unique symphony of interspecies communication. Crystalline Vorthak students communicated through harmonious chimes, while the gaseous Netherians pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Insectoid Crixtal clicked their mandibles in rapid conversation, and the towering Goliath species communicated through subsonic rumbles that vibrated through the floor. Marcus slipped into his usual seat in the back row, next to Lyra Voss, the only other human in Professor Zethara's advanced xenopsychology course. Professor Zethara emerged from the teaching alcove with the fluid grace typical of her species. The Vorthak academic stood nearly 8 feet tall, her translucent purple skin shimmering with the neural pathways that were visible beneath the surface. Her forearms moved independently as she activated the holographic display system, and her large, multifaceted eyes swept across the diverse classroom with the confidence of someone who had been studying behavioral patterns for over 3 centuries. Today, we examine one of the most fascinating aspects of interspecies psychology. Professor Zethara began, her melodic voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic enhancers. The fear response and its variations across different forms of intelligent life. The holographic display materialized in the center of the room, showing a complex 3-dimensional map of known sentient species and their documented fear responses. Hundreds of different creatures appeared in miniature, each displaying their species' characteristic reaction to perceived threats. Fear serves as the ultimate survival mechanism, the professor continued, gesturing with 2 of her arms while the other 2 operated the holographic controls. When faced with mortal danger, every rational species exhibits predictable and logical responses designed to maximize survival probability. The display zoomed in on a section showing various defensive responses. A group of crystalline Vorthak demonstrated their species' reaction to threat stimuli, their translucent forms immediately hardening into diamond-like structures while their neural pathways accelerated, creating beautiful patterns of light beneath their crystallized surfaces. The Vorthak response involves immediate molecular restructuring and enhanced cognitive processing, increasing reaction time by 340% while providing nearly impenetrable protection. Professor Zethara explained with obvious pride in her species' efficiency. Several Vorthak students in the audience chimed approvingly, their bodies flickering with satisfied bioluminescence. The display shifted to show the Netherian response. The gaseous beings demonstrated their species' ability to disperse and reconstitute in safer locations, their forms spreading like intelligent clouds before reforming elsewhere. Netherians utilized their molecular flexibility to simply avoid danger entirely, dispersing across vast areas and communicating through quantum entanglement to coordinate safe regrouping, the professor noted. A pleased harmonic resonance emanated from the Netherian section of the classroom. The presentation continued through dozens of species. The Crixtal, with their hive mind coordination, instantly sharing threat information across their entire collective consciousness. The massive Goliath species, whose fear response involved creating impenetrable defensive formations while broadcasting subsonic warnings to their communities across entire star systems. The energy-based Luminari, who could phase shift into different dimensional frequencies to avoid physical harm entirely. Marcus found himself leaning forward, genuinely fascinated by the incredible diversity of survival mechanisms. Each species had evolved elegant, efficient solutions to the fundamental challenge of staying alive in a dangerous universe. However, Professor Zethara's tone shifted, taking on the academic equivalent of distaste. There exists one species whose fear response defies all logical parameters and challenges our understanding of evolutionary psychology. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing a human silhouette surrounded by question marks and error symbols. Humans, she pronounced the word like she was discussing a particularly virulent disease, appear to possess a fundamentally malfunctioned fear response system. When confronted with overwhelming danger, instead of engaging in proper survival protocols, they exhibit what can only be described as aggressive irrationality. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but Lyra's subtle hand gesture kept him from responding immediately. Around the classroom, various species produced sounds that Marcus's translator interpreted as amusement: chittering from the Krixtal, harmonic laughter from the Vorthak, and subsonic chuckling from the Goliath students. Consider this documented case study. Professor Zathara continued, bringing up a detailed holographic recreation. Mining Station Omega-6, established by human colonists in the Kepler 438 system. The facility was built inside an asteroid with known geological instabilities. The display showed a cross-section of the mining operation, with tunnels stretching deep into the asteroid's core. Warning indicators flashed throughout the structure, showing stress fractures and seismic activity. Any rational species would have immediately evacuated upon detecting the first signs of structural collapse, the professor explained. Standard protocols across all known civilizations require immediate withdrawal and loss mitigation when facing such obvious environmental hazards. The hologram began showing the actual events, pulled from the station's security recordings. Alarms blared throughout the facility as sections of the mine began collapsing. Automated systems broadcast evacuation orders in 17 different languages. Observe the human response, Professor Zathara said with academic disdain. Instead of fleeing, the holographic humans were shown running deeper into the mine. The audio crackled to life with human voices cutting through the chaos. Section 7 is compromised, but we've still got people in Sector 12, came a woman's voice over the communication system. Rodriguez, take your team through the maintenance shaft. Chen, can you stabilize the support structure in Junction 4? I can buy us maybe 20 minutes, replied another voice. But someone needs to get the emergency shelter pods to the trapped miners. The classroom watched in stunned silence as the humans organized rescue operations, while the asteroid literally crumbled around them. Instead of evacuating, they were running toward the danger zones, carrying emergency equipment and coordinating complex rescue procedures. The facility suffered a 78% structural collapse, Professor Zathara narrated. Standard evacuation protocols would have resulted in the loss of 37 lives, but preserved the remaining 203 colonists. Instead, observe the human outcome. The final statistics appeared in the holographic display. Total casualties, 3. All other miners successfully rescued through coordinated human intervention efforts that required multiple individuals to place themselves in extreme danger to save others. By any rational measure, the professor continued, this should be considered catastrophic decision-making that endangered the entire colony. Yet humans classified this as a successful emergency response and requested additional mining equipment to rebuild the facility. A Vorthak student chimed with confusion, their body flickering with puzzled bioluminescence. Professor, surely this is an anomaly. No species could achieve evolutionary success with such defective survival instincts. One would assume so, Professor, Zathara replied, bringing up a new display showing hundreds of data points scattered across a galactic map. However, human space contains over 15,000 documented cases of similar behavior patterns. They regularly engage in activities that their own species acknowledges as extremely dangerous, yet they pursue these activities with what they call Tuesday evening enthusiasm. The professor highlighted several more examples. Human emergency. Responders running into burning buildings to save strangers. Human medical personnel working in plague zones without adequate protection. Human explorers deliberately seeking out the most dangerous, unexplored regions of space. Most puzzling of all, she continued, humans seem to become more capable and creative when experiencing fear, rather than less. Their cognitive function actually improves under stress conditions that would debilitate most other species. Marcus could feel his heart rate increasing not from fear but from growing frustration. Around him, Alien students were discussing humans like they were defective machines rather than sentient beings with their own evolutionary advantages. "Professor," Marcus said, raising his hand. The classroom fell silent as hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and attention organs focused on him. Professor Zathara's multifaceted eyes shifted to regard him with what Marcus interpreted as polite condescension. "Yes, Dr. Kane. Do you have insight into your species' apparently irrational behavior patterns?" Marcus stood slowly, aware that his next words would either enlighten the class or confirm their professor's assessment of human irrationality. "Professor, with respect, I think you're fundamentally misunderstanding how human fear response actually works." The silence in the classroom became absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the station seemed muted as every being present focused their attention on the human who was about to challenge 3 centuries of academic research. "You're analyzing human behavior through the lens of individual survival optimization," Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. "But human fear response didn't evolve for individual survival. It evolved for group survival and problem resolution." Professor Zathara's skin shimmered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as academic interest mixed with skepticism. "Please elaborate, Dr. Kane. How does endangering oneself serve group survival better than standard evacuation protocols?" Marcus felt Lyra shift beside him, and he knew she was ready to support whatever demonstration he might propose. "Professor, you've been studying fear as a preservation mechanism, but what if I told you that human fear response isn't designed to preserve us? It's designed to make us more effective at eliminating threats." The professor's neural pathways pulsed with brighter light, a sign of intense cognitive processing. "That would be an interesting thesis, Dr. Kane. Do you have evidence to support such a claim?" Marcus smiled, and something in that expression made several nearby alien students instinctively activate their defensive postures. "Would you like me to show you?" The practical demonstration. The tension in Lecture Hall Gamma 7 was palpable as Professor Zathara considered Marcus's proposal. Her translucent skin flickered with the rapid neural activity that indicated intense consideration, while her 4 arms moved in the complex gestures that Vorthak used when processing challenging new concepts. "A practical demonstration," she mused, her melodic voice carrying a note of intrigue. "Dr. Kane, are you suggesting we simulate a fear-inducing scenario to observe human behavioral patterns in real time?" "Exactly," Marcus replied, his confidence growing as he saw genuine scientific curiosity replacing the professor's earlier dismissive tone. "With the class's permission, of course, and using the station's emergency training systems." Lyra stood beside him, her engineering background already evident as she pulled out her tablet and began accessing the station's training protocols. "The university maintains comprehensive emergency simulation systems for exactly these kinds of educational purposes," she explained to the class. "We can create a controlled but realistic crisis scenario." A chorus of alien sounds filled the classroom as students discussed the proposal in their various languages. The Krixtal clicked their mandibles in rapid consultation with their hive mind network, while the Goliath students rumbled approvingly in subsonic tones that made the floor vibrate. Professor Zathara raised 2 of her arms for silence. "This is how unconventional but scientifically intriguing. Very well, Dr. Kane. We shall observe your species' fear response under controlled conditions. However, I must warn you that if your demonstration proves my point about human irrationality, it will be included in my published research." "Fair enough," Marcus nodded. "But if it proves my point about human adaptability, I'd like the same consideration." The professor's skin shimmered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as amused agreement. "Acceptable terms. Proceed with your demonstration." Lyra's fingers danced across her tablet as she interfaced with the station's emergency training systems. "I'm programming a Level 4 emergency scenario," she announced to the class. "This will simulate a genuine crisis situation without any actual danger to participants." The lights in the lecture hall began to dim as the emergency systems came online. Red warning illumination replaced the normal white lights, and a subtle vibration began running through the floor as the station's systems prepared to simulate various emergency conditions. "Attention all personnel," came the synthesized voice of the station's emergency system. "This is a training exercise. Emergency protocols are now in effect. Stand by for scenario initiation." Marcus felt the familiar sensation that every human recognized but few other species truly understood, the sharpening of focus that came with adrenaline release. His heart rate increased, but rather than making him panic or flee, it made him more alert, more aware of his surroundings, and more ready to act. "Scenario commencing," the system announced. "Multiple hull breaches detected in sectors 7 through 12. Artificial gravity fluctuations in progress. Emergency bulkhead sealing automatically. Estimated time to critical system failure, 18 minutes. The simulation was impressively realistic. The lights flickered as if power systems were failing, and the artificial gravity actually did fluctuate slightly, causing several alien students to float momentarily before gravity reasserted itself. Emergency blast doors began sliding shut throughout the visible portions of the station, and the sound of escaping atmosphere could be heard in the distance. The alien students' reactions were immediate, and exactly as Professor Zathara had described in her lecture. The Vortex students crystallized instantly, their bodies hardening into protective diamond-like structures. The Netherians dispersed into defensive cloud formations, while the Crixtal formed tight defensive clusters, their hive mind allowing them to coordinate protection patterns. The Goliath students created an impenetrable formation, their massive bodies shielding smaller species, while the energy-based luminary began phase-shifting to avoid potential physical harm. Even the floating jellyfish-like Aquarians contracted into defensive spheres. Every species in the classroom had engaged their evolved survival protocols: defend, hide, wait for rescue. Every species except the humans. Marcus and Lyra stood in the center of the chaos, their postures completely different from the defensive stances around them. Rather than contracting or hardening or hiding, they had spread out, with Lyra moving to one of the wall terminals while Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the entire classroom. "Lyra, what's our primary threat assessment?" Marcus called out, his voice cutting through the emergency alarms with remarkable clarity. "Hull breaches are simulated in the outer sectors, but this classroom is in the inner ring," she responded while her hands flew across the emergency terminal's interface. "We've got approximately 200 individuals here, but the emergency exits are sealed due to the containment protocol." "Right, so our priority is ensuring everyone's safety while finding an alternative evacuation route," Marcus said, his mind already working through the problem systematically. "Can you access the station's emergency override systems?" "Working on it," Lyra replied, her engineering training evident as she navigated through multiple security layers. "The simulation is designed to mimic real emergency conditions, so standard overrides won't work, but every emergency system has fail-safes." Professor Zathara watched in fascination as the two humans moved with purposeful efficiency through what was designed to be a panic-inducing scenario. Her academic training warred with her growing realization that she might have fundamentally misunderstood human psychology. "Got it," Lyra announced. "There's a maintenance corridor that bypasses the sealed sections, but it requires manual activation of the emergency atmospheric systems to make it safe for non-humans." "Where?" Marcus asked, already moving toward her position. "Section J, sublevel 3. But Marcus, it's going to require someone to go through the damaged sections to reach the activation controls." The implications were clear to everyone in the room. In a real emergency, this would mean someone would have to risk their life by traveling through the potentially dangerous areas to save everyone else. Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'll go. You coordinate the evacuation once I get the systems online." "Wait," called Professor Zathara, her scientific curiosity overriding her crystallized defensive posture. "Dr. Kane, in a real emergency, such an action would have a 73% probability of fatal outcome for the individual involved. Why would you choose certain personal danger over the logical response of waiting for professional rescue teams?" Marcus paused at the classroom exit, which had partially sealed but still allowed passage. Around him, the alien students watched with a mixture of fascination and bewilderment. "Professor, that's exactly what I was trying to explain," he said, his voice carrying easily despite the emergency alarms. "You're asking the wrong question. You're asking why I would risk my life instead of waiting for rescue." He gestured around the room at the nearly 200 alien beings in various defensive postures. "But the right question is, why would I wait for someone else to solve a problem that I can solve right now?" "The risk assessment remains unchanged," the professor insisted. "The logical course is to minimize casualties by avoiding unnecessary exposure to danger." "But you're calculating risk wrong," Lyra interjected, still working at her terminal. "You're measuring individual risk versus individual survival. Humans don't calculate like that." Marcus nodded. "When we see a problem that threatens people we care about, our fear response doesn't make us hide, it makes us focus on solving the problem. The fear actually makes us better at finding solutions." To demonstrate his point, Marcus began narrating his thought process as he moved toward the sealed doorway. "Right now, my heart rate is elevated. My reflexes are sharper, and my mind is running through contingency plans faster than normal. The adrenaline isn't making me panic, it's making me more capable." The alien students watched in amazement as Marcus squeezed through the partially sealed doorway and disappeared into the corridor beyond. Through the classroom's internal communication system, they could hear him continuing to coordinate with Lyra as he navigated the simulated emergency conditions. "Approaching Section J now," his voice came through the speakers. "I can see the manual override controls. The simulation has done a good job making this look like actual hull damage." "Be careful, Marcus," Lyra called back while simultaneously working with 3 different emergency protocols. "I'm tracking your position and monitoring the atmospheric readings." "Atmospheric simulation is holding steady," Marcus reported. "Activating the emergency bypass now." Throughout the classroom, alien students began to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't irrational behavior or broken survival instincts. This was a species that had evolved to treat problems as challenges to be overcome, rather than threats to be avoided. "Emergency corridor now accessible," came Marcus's voice. "All atmospheric systems green. Lyra, you can begin evacuation procedures." But instead of immediately evacuating, Lyra continued working at her terminal. "Marcus, I'm seeing something interesting in the simulation parameters. There's a secondary challenge built into this scenario." "What kind of secondary challenge?" Marcus asked, his voice still remarkably calm despite having just completed what other species would consider an extremely dangerous task. "The simulation includes a trapped individual subroutine in Section K. If we just evacuate normally, the scenario marks it as an incomplete solution." Professor Zethara's neural pathways flared with bright bioluminescence. "The simulation is designed to present multiple ethical dilemmas simultaneously. Most species focus on the primary survival imperative." "Well, we can't leave someone behind," Marcus said immediately. "Lyra, can you maintain the evacuation route while I handle the rescue?" "Already on it," she replied, her hands moving across multiple control interfaces simultaneously. "But Marcus, this is going to be even more dangerous. The simulated individual is in a section with compromised life support." The alien students watched in growing amazement as the 2 humans seamlessly divided the complex emergency response between them, each taking on tasks that would challenge entire emergency response teams from other species. Fear response activated and utilized as a performance enhancement tool, Professor Zethara murmured to herself, her academic mind rapidly reassessing 3 centuries of research. "Remarkable." Over the next several minutes, the classroom observed a masterclass in human crisis management. Marcus successfully located and rescued the simulated trapped individual, while Lyra coordinated a complex evacuation procedure that safely moved nearly 200 beings of different physiologies through emergency corridors. Their fear hadn't paralyzed them or made them irrational. It had turned them into a highly efficient problem-solving team. When the simulation finally ended and normal lighting returned, the lecture hall fell silent, except for the soft sounds of alien students returning to their normal, non-defensive postures. Marcus and Lyra returned to the classroom, both slightly out of breath but clearly energized rather than exhausted by their experience. "So," Marcus said, addressing Professor Zathara directly. "What did you observe about human fear?" Response: the professor's translucent skin shimmered with patterns Marcus had never seen before. What he would later learn were the Vorthak expressions for profound intellectual humility and academic excitement. "Dr. Kane," she said slowly, "I believe I owe your species a significant apology, and perhaps a completely revised research paper." The classroom erupted in the various sounds of alien appreciation and amazement, but Marcus barely heard them. He was watching Professor Zathara's face as she processed what she had witnessed. Fear as a catalyst for enhanced problem-solving rather than a survival inhibitor, she mused aloud. "Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary." Lyra grinned at Marcus. "Think she's beginning to understand why humans keep doing things that look crazy to everyone else?" "I think," Marcus replied, looking around at the diverse classroom of alien beings who were all regarding humans with new respect and curiosity, "we just changed some minds about what courage actually looks like."